Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. Hope everyone is having a good weekend. Looks like everything's okay. Hello, Pinaman. Aizain. Ruki. Riki. Palkia. Love being artistry. Hope you're all having a wonderful Saturday. Just got back from... They're having like a petting zoo thing at the local library. Took my daughter there. They had an emu, of all things. So that was interesting. Really hoping I could do one of these on adjustments disorder. I think that's possible. Today's topic was a request. So I think adjustments disorder is definitely something that can be covered in the future. Today, obviously, from the title and from the book, we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. So, imposter syndrome is a little different than what we've covered so far, in that imposter syndrome is not, it's not in the DSM. It's not something that is recognized by the American Psychiatric Association. But it does, there is quite a bit of research done on it. It is brought up quite a bit, especially in like workplaces when it comes to like success in jobs and things like that. And when I read up about it, a lot of it I felt like applied to things that I was going through. It's not something that affects me as much as it used to, but I think it did affect me quite a bit. And I think even if it's not a diagnosable disorder, I think there is a lot of things in this idea to talk about that a lot of people experience, and that there are some different changes that you can make in your line of thinking that can help and better your life. So I think it's something worth talking about. And so we shall. Get my notes here. Well, one of my notes. So it's a very interesting experience preparing for a lesson about imposter syndrome as someone who has struggled with that and perfectionism in the past, because there's certainly a time in my life when coming up to this stream, I would have put in an inordinate amount of time preparing for it, because everything would have had to have been perfect. Like everything would have had to have been, rehearsed. And that is a useful thing to have in some circumstances, but it's not something that should, I think, be applied to everything that we do. It just isn't necessary, and it can really lower the quality of your life. And I've felt that I am more productive when I take better care of myself, rather than killing myself over making sure that something is perfect. So my productivity over the long run is better if I can set some of that aside. Now, I've talked about some of the things that we'll be talking about today in previous videos. I have one on the fear of failure that will be a good companion video to this one. I definitely recommend checking that out. And before I get started, as you can see from my wonderful visual here, most of what I'm going to be talking about has come from this book, The Imposter Phenomenon, by Dr. Pauline Rose Clance. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes wrote a paper, an article back in 1978 titled The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention. You see the idea of originally imposter syndrome was sort of specifically focused towards women. But since that time, in additional research, it's found to affect men as well. But even modern books, you see a lot of them specifically targeted towards women. But I think there's useful information for all genders in those books. But I read The Imposter Phenomenon, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today relates to that, and also my own lessons that I've learned in order to sort of overcome this, and my own, like, how it's affected my life and my understanding of it. Okay, so what is imposter syndrome? So it's not the same as, say, perfectionism, as an example. Imposter syndrome is specifically, it affects someone who achieves success, but despite evidence of that success being presented to them on a consistent basis, they do not accept the success as a result of their own merits or worth, right? They might see it as luck. They were in the right place at the right time. They knew someone who helped them succeed. It's never as a result of their own talent or their own intelligence. And they just have this sort of crippling self-doubt that they hide behind a mask. It's something that they often keep secret, and it's often something that they probably don't even recognize themselves as having. But for imposter syndrome to be a thing, there has to be success, there has to be evidence of that success, and then there has to be a lack of belief in that evidence and a lack of confidence in self. It's kind of the general idea. If anyone has any questions, feel free to bring them up at any time as we kind of go along. If I don't get to them immediately, I will get to them before the end. But my imposter syndrome, it felt like a few different things. So I had a very skewed view of myself and my own successes. I saw it as if I was struggling with something, I was failing with something. It didn't matter if it was a test, an assignment, a work project, or whatever. Like, if that got 100%, if I struggled with it, then I had failed at it. Because I had this skewed view that in order to be a successful person, that things should be easy for you. Like, if you are struggling, you don't see other people who are succeeding. You don't see all of their struggles. So you just see their successes. And it's easy to relate that as to how you should be. And I think that's probably been made worse with social media, where you are seeing a very cultivated image of people and of success, and are getting a skewed view of what that actually looks like behind the scenes. So for me, I felt like if I was struggling, then I was failing. It didn't matter if I was succeeding. If I was struggling, it didn't count. However, conversely, and illogically, I felt like if something didn't require effort, then it wasn't something worthy of praise, or it wasn't something worthy of feeling good about succeeding at. School was a good example. Growing up, I excelled at school and did not seem to struggle as much as those around me. I did, because I enjoyed it, put in time to it, but it never felt like a struggle. It just felt like something that I was sort of naturally good at. And because of that, I didn't really see great straight A's as something worthy of praise. Despite the fact that others did praise. And this is where I diverge a little bit from the book. I didn't agree with everything that the imposter phenomenon has to say. It postulates that, some different reasons that imposter syndrome might form in people. And one of those being that, the child was held to too high of standards or wasn't praised correctly or something like that. I really didn't feel like I had that growing up. I felt like I received a lot of praise from my mom, from my teachers, and I didn't feel a particular amount of pressure in order to get all straight A's, at least that I remember. But I still felt these things myself, and I can't tell you exactly where they came from, but I can tell you some of the ways that I've mitigated it. And so something else that I experienced, and I still do experience to a large degree, and is something that I'm still trying to work on. It's one of the reasons that I created the XP system in the Roll with the Punches journal, which you can get for free at rollpunches.com, was this idea of when I completed a task, I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel like a sense of achievement or accomplishment. I felt a sense of relief that the task was over. And that relief was only temporary because there's always another task that comes. So it is still a struggle for me in order to feel that sense of satisfaction more than just a sense of relief. So that is something that I'm still working on. And Dr. Clance in the book says people tend to think along the lines of, if they're doing something and it's easy, that those aren't signs of intelligence. Those are things that come easy to me. So we discount things that are easy, and we can blame ourselves when we do struggle with things that are difficult for us. So it's sort of a double-edged sword in a way. And it leads to a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety. It can also contribute to depression. She says in the book, such fears and self-doubts make it almost impossible for those people to relax and feel comfortable with their success and with themselves. It's a frustrating way to live. Something that I agree with and have experienced. You always feel like you are on the precipice of failure and being found out that you're not as good as everyone thinks that you are. And so you put in a Herculean amount of effort in order to continue that facade for other people, but also for yourself as well, and for the fear of what is going to happen if you aren't perfect in a thing. And so one of the lessons that I've had to learn is that success and happiness are not equal. And I think I talk about this a little bit in the fear of failure video, but that effort is as laudable in most cases as success is. And so it's about looking at things differently. And it's important to remember that when it comes to imposter syndrome, that evidence does not equal belief. So someone cannot help themselves, or other people cannot help someone who is suffering with this by just showing them more evidence of their success. Because if that worked, then they wouldn't have the issue to begin with. I think we've seen with like conspiracy theorists, like flat earthers, stuff like that, evidence does not equate to belief. You have to have that seed inside of you that's willing to believe something before evidence has any effect, I think. And so it's about cultivating that sense of self-worth to allow that evidence to be able to take root. And I think that evidence is important, and like telling people that, you know, affirming them that they've done a good job, I think is a very useful thing to do. But if people don't believe in themselves, they probably won't believe you. So we have to start internally before that external stuff is really going to take effect. So I want to go through, in the book, they list an imposter syndrome test. So I kind of want to go through those questions. I think that could be interesting. And see if any of these might relate to you. All right, let me get my capture here. This one should work. Transition. Okay. Let me go back. Let me find it here. It's kind of, here we go. It can be kind of slow to scroll. All right, so we're ranking these 1 through 5. 5 means very true. 1 means not at all true. And so you would keep track of these scores. Oh no. Is my microphone broke? We'll fix that later. So we're ranking these 1 through 5. 5 being very true, 1 being not true at all. And we'll sort of score that at the end. So I've often succeeded on a test or task, even though I was afraid that I would not do well before I undertook the task. So that's a 1 through 5. I can give the impression that I'm more competent than I really am. I avoid evaluations if possible and have a dread of others evaluating me. When people praise me for something I've accomplished, I'm afraid I won't be able to live up to their expectations of me in the future. Sometimes think I obtained my present position or gained my present success because I happened to be in the right place at the right time or knew the right people. I'm afraid people important to me might find out I'm not as capable as they think I am. Tend to remember the incidents in which I've not done my best more than those times that I have done my best. Rarely do a project or task as well as I would like to do it. Sometimes I feel or believe that my success in life or my job has been the result of some kind of error. It's hard for me to accept compliments or praise about my intelligence or accomplishments. At times, I feel my success has been due to some kind of luck. Disappointed at times in my present accomplishments, and I think I should have accomplished much more. That one particularly resonates with me. Sometimes I'm afraid others will discover how much knowledge or ability I really lack. I'm often afraid that I may fail at a new assignment or undertaking, though I generally do well at what I attempt. When I've succeeded at something and received recognition for my accomplishments, I have doubts that I can keep repeating that success. If I receive a great deal of praise and recognition for something I've accomplished, I tend to discount the importance of what I've done. I often compare my ability to those around me and think they may be more intelligent than I am. Often worry about not succeeding with a project or on an examination, even though others around me have considerable confidence that I will do well. If I'm going to receive a promotion or gain recognition of some kind, I hesitate to tell others until it's an accomplished fact. Finally, I feel bad and discouraged if I'm not the best or at the least very special in situations that involve achievement. And so, according to the book, if your score is 40 or less, you have few imposter characteristics. Between 41 and 60 is moderate. Between 61 and 80, frequently have imposter feelings. And a score of higher than 80 means you have intense imposter syndrome. Imposter phenomenon referred to in the book, but imposter syndrome experiences. So I'm curious if much if any of that resonated with anyone in chat. So definitely, I resonated with this a lot more in the past than I think I do now. But some of these still very much affect me. I don't really avoid evaluations anymore. They used to really stress me out. But now I kind of seek evaluations because I see it as a way to improve. So that's one that's probably changed for me the most over my lifetime, I would say. And the one that I've changed into more of a positive for me. All right, let's switch back. Hold on, doing the math, but that's a lot of fives. And again, you know, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not diagnosing you with anything. Hello. Okay, sorry about that. I had to change the mic and then add it again. Okay, we heard I'm not a doctor. All right, so yeah, not a doctor or therapist, not diagnosing with anything. Not that imposter syndrome is something that you can be diagnosed with anyway, but I think that these sort of negative thoughts and self-doubt can be very real. And I do think that it is something that can be improved, particularly with cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. Just training our brain to think about things differently, I think, could be very effective. It's kind of what I said before. Love says, I feel like I haven't done anything and I can't, and if I could, I would have done so by now. I definitely have had feelings like that myself. And I think it can be a skewed view of what success is, right? And what it is that we're working towards. If it's, fame, fortune, recognition from others, like we might be striving for something that is beyond what would actually make us happy. Dr. Zaria says at least 50% applies to me, I think. I see some of this applying to me. And I think that perfectionism, self-doubt I think self-doubt in particular is a very common thing. And it's something that most of us experience at one time or another. It's just, we still have to find ways to allow ourselves to be able to recognize our successes when they happen and to celebrate them. And not to just sort of wave them away as luck or happenstance or something like that. But like, it's so natural for us, for me anyway, to own my failures. It should be as natural to own successes. And we do, there are coping mechanisms that I have found that were negative coping mechanisms in order for me to deal with this idea of imposter syndrome, where you sort of, if you expect to fail, you set up excuses ahead of time in order to explain them. So waiting until the last minute to do something. The idea of procrastination, where if I wait and then do something at the last minute, then I didn't truly give it my best effort. And then therefore, if I do fail at it, it doesn't count as much as if I had started on it earlier. So I have seen procrastination as sort of like a self-defense mechanism in order to overcome a fear of failure. But it's about not fearing that failure. It's about taking stock in the attempt as well as the success or in the failure. Like, we learn so much from failure, and anyone who has accomplished anything of note has failed more times than they've succeeded. And so we can't let that get to us. Okay, so let's talk about the imposter cycle a little bit. So it's the idea of remembering the failure and the struggles more than the success. And so because the negative impacted you more, then that is sort of how your brain wires itself in order to avoid that negativity in the future. And then therefore we do those things like procrastination and setting up those excuses for ourselves in order to avoid that negativeness. So we've got to use different ways of framing things, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I'll talk about some of the ones from the book and some of the ones that I've done in order to sort of rewire things. All right, this text is really small. So sometimes you can procrastinate, sometimes you can go the other way, where you just prepare way too much. And so, that can be staying up late, just putting in hours upon hours upon hours on doing this thing. And so for me, for this lecture, I will set limits, healthy limits on myself. So I will say, okay, I work this many hours and sort of try to plan it out as best I can. And I will also utilize that technique I've talked about before, where it's like 20 minutes working on the thing, 5 or 10 minutes completely resting until I get back to it, and then continuing that sort of back and forth, not burning myself out. Because I have in the past, and certainly can, just go until a thing is done. But I have found that the level of achievement and productivity that I can acquire by doing that versus taking it easier, there's not that much of a gap. Because when I am crunching on something and my mind is not in the best place, it's a very tired mind, I make a lot more mistakes that I have to fix, like after a night's sleep or something like that. And I've just found that the quality of work is just not that much different. And it's certainly not worth the punishment that I'm putting on my body and mind. So that is something that I recommend attempting, is picking a task, an assessment, something that you would normally be very stressed about, that you would be, putting all of your worries and thoughts and work into, and instead trying to find a more reasonable amount and testing that and see how it goes. I wouldn't take just one time as gospel, because you might do poorly, and like one instance is not enough for us to judge something. But it feels like that when it becomes a negative experience. Like if you do fail at something and you feel that terrible feelings of failure, that one instance can be enough in order to put you down this path to imposter syndrome. But we can't let one instance do that. It should be something that is repeated, and then we can hopefully examine it in a logical manner and figure out, okay, what exactly is the problem and what is the best way to approach this, where I can be healthy and happy, but also achieve things and be productive. So there's a balance that we're striving for. And so the imposter cycle, according to Dr. Clance, looks like bad dreams, worry, and fear, which leads into either immobility and procrastination or over-preparation, which then leads to frenzied work, which then leads to success, which then leads to praise, which then leads to temporary relief. So let me go ahead and put that up here just so you can see that. Hopefully we don't lose the mic this time. This one. And this one. So that's sort of the cycle that we're dealing with. Worry, fear, procrastination or over-preparation, frenzied work, success, praise, temporary relief is what the cycle looks like. Mic's still good? Mic's still good. Okay, let's get this back over there. And so, in my life, and what has sort of led me to turn things around, is I just realized that it isn't worth it. Like whatever I thought that level of stress and anxiety was giving me wasn't necessary. And if it had been necessary, wouldn't have been worth the success that I was getting from it. Because why are we succeeding if we are not able to enjoy life? Or if we're not bettering the lives of others? But hopefully, even in bettering the lives of others, we are bettering our own lives as well. And so I'm definitely not against hard work or pushing oneself, pushing boundaries, or things like that. But I do believe that there are healthy avenues and there are healthy expectations that are not always fostered by school systems or workplaces. Like hopefully your boss or your workplace has your self-interest in mind, but often that is not the case. Often you are a means in order to profit that company, and that can be at the expense of yourself and your happiness. And so if you're doing all this and killing yourself in order to get that praise from the school or from the workplace or whatever, is it worth that? And what is a level that you could do and still achieve results without having to burn yourself out? Is the question. All right, so I want to go into some different CBT techniques. that can maybe help us alter some of our behavior, some of our thoughts, in order to lessen this issue. But first, I'm going to look and see if there's any questions or comments. Do that sometimes, but the thing is I succeeded in the task, and that feeds my idea I can do almost anything, even if I have zero proof that I could or have the skills for it. Succeed. So it feeds the idea. I think I understand what you're saying. Okay. Doesn't look like there's any other questions. Unfortunately, the Kindle app scrolls really slow. Should have written down the page numbers. Let's see. Did I highlight it? Oh, and something else that definitely identified with me when I was reading about this was the idea of how this syndrome and working like this can really limit your success. And so the idea of remaining the big fish in the little pond, where instead of believing in yourself that you can accomplish more, you instead might tend to want to remain in a place where you are not so challenged and remain in an environment where you are sort of extraordinary in your position, but it's not reaching your full potential. And so for me, I was an exceptional student, and I don't want to say I was content, but it sort of became expected that I was the best wherever I was. And it wasn't until I sort of joined the workforce that I had to sort of come to that reality that that isn't necessarily always going to be the case, and that there's always someone better at you at something. And so you can either accept that and embrace it and continue to, put in the effort to get better and succeed at things, or you can retreat and stay in a place where you're not challenged like that. And you can be the best at where you are, but it's not necessarily reaching your potential. All right. Let's find that test. And you can see this not only in a professional instance, but can also be in relationships as well. So in parenthood, as an example, am I doing everything that I can for my child? Is this the correct thing to do? And just bringing in that worry and that fanaticism of doing everything right, rather than looking at it from a more healthy perspective and realizing that, sort of relaxing yourself a little and realizing that if you are happy and healthy, then you are probably a better parent than if you are trying to make sure everything that you do is perfect all the time. Hi, Snowy. Okay, good. I found it. All right, so let's talk about breaking the cycle. All right, so first I'm going to go over some ideas from the book, and then I'm going to talk about some things that I have discovered even before I read into all this. So in the book, they recommend journaling, which I've talked about before. There are lots of benefits to it. But in particular, these exercises. So whenever you find yourself doubting your ability to cope or to complete a task, make a note of the feelings. And then when looking over the notes, try to determine if you're experiencing, if it lines up with sort of what we've talked about so far. If they are reasonable feelings that you're feeling, or if they tend to be more imposter feelings. And try to check yourself. Try to see if you are dismissing successes of things that you wrote about, and you can compare it with evidence that you've been given for those successes. And so ahead of time, you want to write down the things that you are worried about succeeding at. And then you kind of want to have a post-mortem about whether you did actually succeed at it or not, and any sort of evidence, feedback from other people about that success. And sort of not allowing it to just ruminate in your own mind, but having it externalized out in front of you makes a huge difference. And then, hopefully, by practicing that enough, you can believe in yourself that these experiences that you listed out reflect your true ability, and not just luck or, whatever it is that you have attributed it to it otherwise. And in the book, she recommends going through tasks and writing mask or mask-free next to it. Whether you were trying to put on a mask of perfectionism and were trying to make extra effort in order for people to think that you were super confident in a thing, or if it was a mask-free thing where you weren't afraid to allow doubts and allow struggles to pierce through. And just practicing that. Try to shift more of those to mask-free things, not being afraid of a reaction or a perception of other people. But understanding that those other people probably are feeling a lot of the same doubts that you are, but are not expressing them. And so not only is expressing them helping yourself, and it can also, like if you express them with other people, those other people may help you. So you don't have to do everything alone, which is something that I've also struggled with. Not accepting help from others, but trying to do something on my own. But by verbally expressing and allowing that mask to break through and showing those doubts, then I've been able to incorporate others into those tasks as well. And those tasks get done. And it's a lot less hard on me. It's taken a lot less stress than it needed to. And so consciously, slowly, just taking tasks that you deem maybe as less important than others and trying to practice removing that mask, and then continuing to apply that to more and more important tasks. And hopefully, you are in a, loving and comfortable enough environment that is reciprocated. And is encouraged. And hopefully you encourage others to do the same thing as well. Because a lot of people struggle with this thing. Okay, and then another technique they talk about is what I talked about with me preparing this stream in particular is, so if you have a task, so for me, preparing for this stream, if ordinarily I would worry about that say, a week ahead of time and start to, either work on it then or just worry and procrastinate it until later. Trying to tell yourself that in practice, not worrying about it until day X, right? So if for me it's 7 days, I might say, okay, I'm not going to worry about it until Monday, which is 5 days. And then I can see how that goes. And I will find that I will have success again, despite worrying about it for 2 less days. And then I can try it again. And then I can try it again. And then I can continue moving that worry deadline until I find that, well, the worrying isn't helping at all. And I actually have a much better sense of how much time I need to do for this task than my worried brain does. And so I can hopefully, over time, and it's not a light switch, it's not something that's going to happen immediately, but hopefully I can prove to myself through continued successes, I can rewire my brain to allow that worry to release and to find myself putting an appropriate amount of time and effort into a task rather than drastically overcommitting. And then, as part of my journaling, I will note, because I spent less time on this thing, I was also able to accomplish this in the time that normally I would have spent, reading over all of my notes again, or reading this imposter phenomenon book again. Rather than doing that, I was instead able to do this, and I was also able to have a successful stream about imposter syndrome, despite not spending every spare moment working towards it. Here's a list that I can visually see in my diary of things that I was able to do in the time that I normally would have spent panicking about that stream. I was able to do this and the thing that I would have been worried about. Something else that they recommend in the book is the idea of fantasizing or imagining ourselves going through an anxiety-arousing situation without the fear and the doubt. So kind of visualizing giving the presentation and it going well. And for me, but I have a very good imagination. I'm very creative, and I'm very good at imagining things. And so that can be a very bad thing when it comes to imposter syndrome, because I can imagine the failure, and I can imagine the things that could go wrong, and I can imagine, the negative thoughts, and I can sort of eat myself away with the anxiety. But because I have that power to be able to imagine the negative, I can also imagine the positive. And so forcing myself to imagine positive outcomes instead can help lessen that burden. And so if I find myself imagining a negative thought, I don't necessarily try to close it away, but I then try to equal it out and say, okay, well, now let me imagine a positive outcome instead. And then maybe I'll try to imagine 2 positive outcomes for every 1 negative one, or a longer, spend more time on the positive, imagining the positive than the negative. And that's something that I do best pacing around, sometimes listening to music. I can imagine things very vividly. But it's something that you could write down in a journal as well. You can write a negative outcome and you can write a positive outcome. And by having to get that from your brain onto the page, you do sort of have to picture it and you have to think of those words. And that can make it more real. So writing a positive outcome, I think, can be a powerful tool. Now, we've kind of talked about this one a little bit before, but picking out a task that is not crucial to your job or your personal situation and deliberately spending less time and effort on it. And they say here, watch yourself closely and allow only the amount of hours necessary to do the job well. And then proceed with the project and see what happens. So we kind of talked about that before, but just finding low-hanging fruit and seeing that even though we think, and it makes some amount of sense, that our brain is worrying and is anxious because that helps us achieve things, we can find that it doesn't actually help us. It can be detrimental, as a matter of fact, and that we don't have to believe the worry because it doesn't have our best interest in mind. It is, our worry and our anxieties are not trying to succeed. They are trying to avoid failure, and they're trying to avoid negative feelings. But we shouldn't live like that. We shouldn't live to avoid the negative. We should live to strive for and to pursue the positive, is the idea. Because for me, I found that's a much better way to live. As someone who has lived an entire life with anxiety, panic disorder, and often with depression, it is much worse to flee from the negative than it is to run towards the positive. Okay, and I'm going to show this here. This is another journal idea that they have. Screen capture. Bam. All right, can you see that? And can you still hear me? I guess if you can't hear me, you won't tell me. But you should see my lips moving. Okay, good. All right, so this idea of not just taking in words as compliments, but being a detective kind of and writing them down as evidence that you can show yourself later. So keep a record of any positive feedback or compliments that you receive. So in the left column is what the person said. The middle column is what you responded. And then in the right column is what you thought in your head as you were responding to that. So the example they give here is Fred said, "That was an excellent report you gave the board." And then I would have said, "Thanks, the board is very responsive." Then I changed the subject. But in my head, I was thinking, I had a lot of help and I should have analyzed the cost factors. So I sort of dismiss in my brain that praise, give it to others in my head, and instead focus on what I could have done better, rather than just accepting the praise. And so this is something that I found myself doing just the other day. I had the, I had the stream on depression a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and someone at work gave me the compliment, something along the lines of like, that was a very good stream you had. It was a very brave thing to do, and it must have been very hard. And my response, I sort of dismissed it and was like, oh, that wasn't hard. Like the hard part was living through the experiences that gave me the knowledge in order to have that stream. So I just sort of dismissed it. And in my head, I thought mainly just what I said. We're like, well, that's, like the stream is not something that's worthy of praise. It's just like something that I should do. And so I still find myself falling into this trap of just sort of dismissing praise away. And it could be because you don't want to seem, conceited, or, you think that being humble is a good thing. But I think that you can still be humble and you can still be a good person, but you can allow yourself to accept and to be pleasured isn't the word I'm looking for, but to allow yourself to enjoy praise. And so that's something that I'm still working on. All right, let's go back. Look at the mic. Mic looks good. And so this is a journaling thing that I'm going to start trying. I'm going to start looking at compliments that I've received. I'm going to try to give better responses to those, and I'm going to try to better my thought patterns about them. So this is something that I found in this book that I'm going to try, and hopefully is going to lead to a betterment in my thought processes. Let's see here. I think that's mostly what I wanted to cover. So I'm not sure about the value of this particular technique, but I think it is interesting. So I don't think that there's always a lot of benefit to finding inciting incidents for a lot of mental health struggles. I think that is often irrelevant to fixing them or to bettering ourselves. I think a lot of effort could be wasted in trying to figure out the inciting thing. But I also think that sometimes if you are able to identify inciting things, you can avoid or mitigate those things in the future. But as a parent, especially, if I can identify things that I think might have caused some of my issues growing up or issues as an adult, maybe if I am able to identify those, I can make sure if it's something that my parents did, it's something that I can make sure that I'm doing differently for my daughter. And so one of the things that is recommended in the book is thinking back over your life to remember times when you felt humiliated or shamed for a mistake that you made, and then allowing yourself to sort of relive that in your own mind. And trying to go back and think if you resolved to never feel that again. And so fantasizing about that same experience, but changing it to where you were powerful enough to change the situation so that you didn't feel ashamed. So visualizing the same experience with a more favorable outcome and seeing if that can help you feel better about it and can help relieve some of that fear of failure or shame or whatever that might be driving this imposter syndrome. So I thought that was kind of interesting. For me, I can't really remember any moments like that, specific moments of shame from failure or anything that led to it. For me, I think it was more of, so there was a verse in the Bible that really got into my head when I was a kid. And I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it was, the parable about the talents. And, there's a gentleman who's given, each gentleman is given 10 talents, which is money. And, one of them invests it in one way and comes back with more talents. Another invests it another way and comes back with even more talents. And the third one buries it and comes back with the exact same amount. And they're shamed for that, right? Because they didn't increase what they were given. And so I always had this feeling growing up that I was given these talents. I'm really good at school. I'm often pointed out as smarter than those around me and more talented, at least academically, than those around me. And so if I am not fostering those talents, then I'm not living the way that I should. If I'm not doing the very best that I can, then these talents are wasted on me and should have been given to someone else. And so that's something that I'm still sort of kind of in between of my thoughts of it. Part of me still feels that that is an admirable way to think. But looking at my life, I can realize that I have given myself way more suffering than I should have, framing my life that way. And not recognizing that success doesn't equal happiness. And even if you are given these talents, that in bettering your life, the lives of others, especially the lives of those that you love, is a success in and of itself. And I shouldn't have this strict vision of what success is, of fame or worldwide recognition for something, or, curing cancer, making the history books, that there are different kinds of success. And there's, I don't want to say different levels, but many different types of life has value, and not just the one that I kind of had pigeonholed myself into, if that makes sense. All right, I think there's one other section that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so the last section is about working with other people. So, in all of these streams, I try to talk about, even if this doesn't relate to you, there's a high probability that there's someone in your life that is struggling with some or all of these issues. And so the Imposter Phenomenon book that's on screen talks about working with other people in order to help them, the sort of do's and don'ts. And so I think that's a good thing to cover. So on the don'ts side of things, there's don't ignore their fear and doubts. Don't rush to immediately reassure by saying you've always done well in the past, you'll do fine now. And definitely don't tease them about their fears. But on the do side, take their fears and doubts seriously. Even if you recognize them as illogical or wrong, they are still feeling them and they believe them. And just waving it away is not going to work. So instead, you want to take it seriously and you want to hear what they have to say about them. You want to ask them things like, what is making you afraid? And see if you can understand where the fear is coming from, and then reassure that specific fear. Another don't assume victims are helpless or unable to change. Don't withdraw from them because you can't seem to get them to hear your concerns. Don't give up after you've witnessed the imposter cycle several times. And don't be dishonest about how you feel. But instead, let them know by your words and actions that you love them and that you're not rejecting them. Help them temporarily feel better by showing love. Although it won't necessarily change the cycle for them, it can ease pain, and reassurance can help them not to panic. But you can also be honest and say, I feel angry and sad when I can't seem to help, if that's the way you feel. So this next one is something that I need to focus on more, because I am not specific enough with my praise with other people. But you want to be specific with praise. So you don't want to make generic statements of just like, you're great, or you did a great job, or, you have no reason to worry, you're wonderful, something like that. You also don't want to be dishonest about praise, because they'll probably pick up on your insincerity, and that will reinforce their need to put on that mask. So instead, try to be very specific and give examples. So one example they give in the book is, I'm impressed with your knowledge of and use of language. So if they're giving a presentation or something like that, don't just say, that was a great presentation. Try to find specific things that you can praise. I think is important. And being honest. And that's another thing that I'm trying to get better at, because I'm terrible. And so for me, I think that is, like we talked about before, when it comes to those 3 different columns of how I accept praise, maybe I should start doing that with how I give praise. So on the left, what I noticed. In the middle, what I said for praise. And then on the right, re-examining it and writing what I should have said instead. What more specific thing I could have said. I think that will be a good exercise for me to try. And when it comes to reassuring, though, you do want to be careful about not setting them up to feel a certain way about failure. So on the don't side of things here, it says, don't immediately say that a catastrophe will not occur when they begin expressing the fear that they will fail. Because, it is possible that they will fail, and it is possible that catastrophes can happen. It's better to say how likely is their scenario to happen, and to instead work with them in order to find a more likely outcome of what would happen if they failed. Something that's probably much milder than they are worried about. And hopefully you can sort of guide them to that themselves rather than just giving it to them. You might give it to them and they agree with it, but it will mean more to them. It will have more of an effect if, through leading questions, as an example, you can get them to come to that conclusion themselves instead. And sort of, thoughts that come from them have more impact than thoughts coming from you sometimes. And on that note, don't say that you believe that they could never fail. It might just make them worry more since your expectations are high. Instead, listen, let them know that you will love and care for them even if they fail. Tell them that you love them for reasons other than just success, and reinforce that through your words and your actions. Okay. So I think that's everything that I had to cover on imposter syndrome. Like I said, it is something that I'm still, I still struggle with it. I still struggle with perfectionism. I still struggle with that fear of failure, but it isn't as impactful as it has been in previous times of my life. And it's something that I'm just continuing to get better at. It's something, like anything else, it just requires practice and maintenance in a way. It might not ever go away forever, but it can be lessened, and it can continue to sort of lessen over time. And if you notice it starting to rear its head again, try to, hopefully you journaled in the past and wrote down what worked for you before, start practicing again, or even better, never stop practicing it. Even if it does get better, continue to practice it, because it is something that we can fall back into again and again. All right, looking at chat again. Have you ever thought about becoming a teacher or a life coach? I have taught in the past. I've taught like computer science kind of stuff, mostly. But yeah, I like teaching. I don't know about life coaching. I haven't really looked into that, as to what exactly that would be involved. I have considered going on in school to get degrees in psychology, to maybe consider going down like a therapist route. I don't know. But I hope to sort of achieve similar goals with this Roll with the Punches channel. And I do hope to be able to write some self-help books at some point, which hopefully will help people. That is something on my plate that I hope to make a reality someday. Are there any questions or other things that require discussion? But yeah, like I said, I do recommend checking out the fear of failure video that I did a while back on the channel. Talk about some of the things we talked about today, but I think there's some other information over there as well. But yeah, it's just about finding ways to look more kindly upon oneself and to judge yourself fairly rather than harshly. And I think that even doing that it will only help your success, because I have found that I am more productive when I am feeling better, when I'm feeling more relaxed. Like, being kind to myself has not magically erased any sort of ambition that I've had. I don't think it has made me lazy. It's just I can put things in better perspective. And because I am in a better place, I can enjoy not only the success, but also the process that leads up to the success. And if you look at anything, I think that's really worth doing, the process of it, the journey of doing it, is going to last a lot longer than the success of it. Like, whatever feeling of success that you get, that end is a very short time frame. It's much better to be able to enjoy the lead up to that as well, and to be able to find ways to do it. Because then, even if it's not a success, you've still given yourself enjoyment. Thank you, Yursa. I appreciate it. I do this every Saturday. If you ever have suggestions for topics, you can leave them over at discord.gg/blindwave in the Roll with the Punches channel. You can give comments on the YouTube video. I always read all of those on the channel. You know, as an example, being really good in school, I learned and am very good at reading and sort of retaining information. So, you know, to get ready for this stream, I was able to read that. How many page book is it? Let's see. Where are we? Where's the pages? That's only 205. But I was able to read and take notes for that 205 page book in a couple of hours, you know? Like, but I was able to use that talent in order to make this stream, which hopefully helps someone, informs people, you know, if they're not getting all the answers from here, at least they have an idea of what to research for more help. And, you know, I was able to stress about it less, enjoy gaining additional knowledge on the topic, and then using that to make a success for a stream. And not what I would have done in the past, where it would be, you know, spending, you know, staying up until 2 a.m, working on this for a pretty similar result, I think. I'll give another few minutes for additional questions, and then we'll shut this puppy down. I think that's all I have really to talk about on the topic. Someone before asked, I don't know if you're still around, Azizi, but my favorite type of shows like a genre. I mean, if you consider anime a genre, then anime. But if you want something more specific, I really like mystery. I think that's maybe my favorite thing. I always used to love Sherlock Holmes books as a kid. I really like watching Columbo, but that's sort of reverse mystery. But yeah, I like the Phoenix Wright games. I like what's other examples of mysteries? You know, I really like watching things like Monk and Psych, those sort of things. I like Lost. Lost was a fun mystery. Attack on Titan was a really fun, interesting mystery. Deadly Premonition, absolutely. Oh. I've heard of the 3-body problem. I haven't watched it, but it did look intriguing. I usually avoid new shows in case Blindwave ever does them. But maybe. Lost was good. It's a different kind of show, but if you like that mystery box show and you haven't watched Attack on Titan, I'd give that a shot. Because that is pretty cool. All right. Anything else before I shut this puppy down? Be a short stream today, but they don't all have to be 2 hours. I don't know what's going to be next week yet. I haven't decided. If you have suggestions, let me know. That's okay. I mean, you can ask. Sometimes even a repeat of something is, if it's not phrased exactly the same way, might, help someone else. Because you can teach one thing 1,000 ways, and each of those ways will not increase knowledge, but will be a revelation for 1,000 different people, right? Like, I spent a long time trying to learn how to do pull-ups, and I had watched video after video and had trainers and things go over the technique, and none of it clicked until there was one video that I watched on YouTube that explained it in a different way, and then all of a sudden it clicked. Just the metaphor of your hands are just hooks and your arms are just straight poles, and you're pulling those hooks to the ground. That made it click for me and allowed me to sort of use the correct muscle. It allowed me to use the muscles in a correct way that allowed me to do it rather than how I was trying to do it before. So answering a question, even if it's for a second or 100th time, is never a waste of time. When did I first read Dr. Clarence's book? I finished it yesterday for the first time, is when I read that particular book. Now, I have read articles and have watched videos and things on imposter syndrome before. But my first time actually reading the book was yesterday. And I've talked with therapists about these ideas, not just in therapy, but just talking to psychologists and therapists and things. I'm very interested in these sorts of things, and I want to help people. So, I just want to increase my knowledge, even if it's not to become a therapist. The more I know, the more I can help. But yeah, it wasn't, honestly, not my favorite book. You'll notice therapists, psychiatrists, doctors can be really good at those things and not really good writers. So it wasn't, my favorite psychology book that I've read. I think there's a lot of good stuff in it, but I also think that there's a lot of repeat stuff, a lot of fluff. And I do question some of it, especially when it comes to the effort of, and some of the techniques described about, looking back to your childhood to figure out the cause of this. Some of that I question. But even, and this is true of all kinds of things. It is risky, I might even call it a sin, to dismiss something outright if it contains something that you do not agree with, or even if it contains something that is false. because there's can be truth in things that also contain falsehoods. So I think it's a mistake to hand wave a whole because part of it is rotten. And inversely, just because I agree with something that someone says or is in a work, that does not mean that I should take everything from that as gospel. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for me. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I hope this was helpful to someone in some way. We will continue on this train next Saturday at noon at Roll with the Punches. And I hope that you are now able a little more to roll with those punches yourself. So thank you so much, everyone. Really enjoyed this. And yeah, have a wonderful weekend. Bye, guys.